Hello, good morning.
Morning.
Please, I learned you have a house, a chamber and hall apartment in Dansoman. So can I see it?
It's gone.
It's gone.
Yeah, but there's another one at
Dansoman where? Sahara.
Down.
Is it nice?
Oh, it's nice.
Okay, so what do I have to do?
When you come register for 30 cities, then after you go to the place, you give us 10% commission.
10% commission of 7,200.
Yeah.
So I give you 720 Ghana. Why do I have to pay 30 Ghana again?
30 Ghana is the registration.
So I've been doing this for like 3 hours now, and the story is the same. They all are not taking less than 6 months as prescribed in the rent law of Ghana. So I have eventually agreed to meet this particular one at Dansoman so that we can go and see the house and probably pay the 30 Ghana as he's requesting, and then continue from there.
Don't worry, be happy.
I have paid about 3 agents in 2 months, but I set off today hoping these ones would work. It's 10 a.m. and I'm at Dansoman Keep Fit Down, a suburb of Accra. The first thing Eric asked for was his agent registration fee, but I didn't have it, begging him to take me round so I could pay later. But he wouldn't budge, since it was the first requirement. After negotiating for a while, he agreed to take 10 instead of the 30 cedis. Soon, we were at an uncompleted apartment, convincing me it would be ready in 5 days. I met the landlord and he assured if I could pay a 2 years advance of 7,200 cedis, I could move in a week's time. Disappointed, I had to look elsewhere. I called another agent who agreed to meet me at La Paz. He also took his agent fee and led the way to a house. We were told someone had just paid for it. It was 4 p.m. by then. He took me to another house, also uncompleted, which would be completed in 2 weeks. After moving about with 4 different agents and paying them all, frustration set in.
Shall I have another one around this place? If your money is ready, I can take you to that place. Then that place is 2.5. It's completed. Sure. Moving fee, that one is registration, just 20 Ghana.
For walking to that?
Yeah. That's registration.
And you pay for walking?
Oh, how can I pay for your walking? You have to pay because you don't know the place.
But why do you have to take 20 Ghana before you go and show me we are just walking to the place?
You know, it's 50-50.
Or you even take the 20 and if we have to take a transport or something, I would have to pay.
Definitely, you have to pay.
I'll pay the 20 and still pay for your transport.
Yeah, because you're looking for a room. It's not easy for you to get a room in Accra, as you can see. It's not easy. We have been searching since morning. Ask my brother.
According to the rent law, an advance rent is not supposed to go beyond 6 months. But it looked like I would remain homeless if I go by that. So, will the person take 6 months?
6 months.
Yes, or how long would the landlord take?
2 years.
2 years?
2 years. Yeah.
Oh, so he won't take less than 2 years?
No. Accra, you can't get room for 6 months. This man, unless you go rent hotel.
Accra, I can't get room for 6 months.
No. I don't think so. No one will even do that for me.
Talking to some people in town, it was obvious tenancy is not the best position in the capital.
Landlord for no hadwin. Landlord ko wi akoko. To dan man 11 years. Nam ko 2.3 yini buy. Yini buy was my own singing room and the porch no. Yan 250 da. Me say porch me am porch no. I feel also buy man 400,000. Wan ga some 1 week. So 1 week was me find 300,000. If a man no. Sa nsinya mema do mema simi de meto akoma ngasam hwi no agent bi na epema me na that no bi odan ni o mo just can be 3 months tin nipa ni ni no man na me so metwim no makom tema de na ba sa no afiro mba na me wo odan dada
research has revealed about 85% of Ghanaians cannot afford to buy a house. Worsening economic conditions has also shot up prices of homes, making the average Ghanaian worker unable to cope. Clearly, access to decent residential housing in Ghana is gradually drifting beyond the reach of the average Ghanaian worker.
Don't worry. Be happy.
Wow, very interesting report there, but I'm sure that a lot of people can relate to that, the stresses of looking for accommodation in the capital. So this is the chamber. We are looking at the issue of rent, and my guest this morning is Nana Kweku Efrifa Nsiasari. Wow, that's a mouthful. He's a legal practitioner at Sorry at Law. Good morning, Nana.
Good morning.
Is it okay if I call you Nana?
Call me Kweku.
Call you Kweku. Okay, it's good to see you again.
Good to see you.
This morning we are talking about Accra rent Wahala. Right. What did you make of that story filed by
quite
Catherine?
Interesting. But that's the reality.
That's the reality, isn't it? Yes. One thing that struck out for me was the fact that people demand or your rent exceeding 6 months advance. Is it not an offense?
Well, it is an offense under the appropriate laws governing rent. The question is that it is difficult in reality because the law says that you cannot demand more than
the landlord cannot demand
more than, and I think the operative word is demand. And so if you're looking at a situation where someone is going into a tenancy agreement from the outset, and the agreement is supposed to be the deed of both parties to it, and they agree that he will pay more than 6 months rent right from the outset. I mean, the interplay of the sanctity of that agreement as against the prohibition of it by law. Ideally, once the law prohibits the doing of an act, an agreement to do it will not suffice. But here the law says that the landlord cannot demand, and so it does not in fact prohibit the doing of an act in terms of the landlord and the tenant coming together to agree.
Okay.
So
and
indeed,
see,
if you look at the wording of the law, it appears to be pointing at a situation where a landlord would compel a tenant so to do. And so when there is a situation where it could, or it would appear apparent that it's the deed of the both of them agreeing to do this, then the application of the law becomes a bit.
And indeed, some
funny.
Tenants actually prefer it that way because then they won't be subject, or the rent will be subject to review and an increase over time. So they'd rather pay bulk in over a year or two, or so on and so forth. Okay. First of all, what are the laws that govern landlords and tenants relationships in Ghana?
Well, currently in Ghana there are two basic acts, which is the Rent Control Law, PNDC Law 138 of 1986, and then the Rent Act of 1963.
Okay.
Both of them essentially seeking to regulate the relationship between landlords and tenancy in general in Ghana.
Okay, so these are the two laws that govern these two relationships.
And there are some regulations that have been basically done consequent upon these two acts.
Okay. Is there a specialized course that deals with issues of landlord-tenant disagreements and so on and so forth?
Yes, we have specialized district court, I would say. In Accra here, if you go somewhere close to the Kwame Nkrumah Mausoleum, we have the Rent and Motor Court. So, and these are district courts, because under these courts are established what we call the rent and housing committees. So essentially, impasse between tenant and landlord, and even regulation of tenancy is overseen by these housing and rent committees. And then beyond them, if there are appeals and stuff like that, they lie to the rent court and basically the district magistrate court.
Right. Now, a lot of time we hear about rent control. What exactly is rent control?
These rent controls, like I've said, is the rent and housing committees, which are basically set up under the PNDC Law 138. Now, what is the mandate of these committees? Basically, is to regulate the relationship between tenant and landlord. Basically, to regulate tenancy in Ghana. So they are set up as a composition essentially drawn out of the society to make sure that the laws as are set out under the Rent Control Law and the Rent Act governing tenancy are basically adhered to.
So do they work? Is it a functioning body? What exactly do they do?
Well, whether or not it's functioning, in my own opinion, is relative, because like we've always mentioned here, Ghana has marvelous set of laws. Our legal regime is excellent. It could be compared to anywhere in the Western world, in the developed world. The problem is with the institutions that are supposed to make sure that these legal regimes are actually effectuated. And the problem is that the usual one, we have issues with funding, we have issues with attitude of the general working populace, and so on and so forth. And so you realize that, yes, in Accra, for instance, I see the rent and housing committees get very busy. They do a lot of work, but as to whether or not the work is effective is another problem. Essentially due to funding and commitment, basically.
So essentially the rent control, the body is there to kind of act as a judge or whatever between the landlords and the tenants.
Yes.
So if you have an issue, whether you're the landlord or the tenant, all you need to do is to go there and tell them whatever it says your problem is, and they will sort it out for you.
That's correct. But even before then, they have a mandate to compile a register of all leases and tenancies. So, for instance, if you walked to any district rent and housing committee, they are supposed to be in a position to tell you how many tenancies are in force within the district, how many vacant rooms or apartment or housing are available for rent, and so on and so forth. See, the law is such that it would have been marvelous if these committees are working well, because then the issue with shortage of accommodation and all those things, the people having to go to pay agents to rent and all that, would have been dealt with, because the law is framed in such a manner that these committees are there to collect data to begin with on rent. So any landlord who has accommodation available for rent would basically have registered with the housing and rent committee, and data is compiled. If people move out of accommodation, they basically file the fact of that with the committees, and so that you and I, if we need accommodation, can easily walk to the committee and then find out we need an accommodation, let's say in Airport Residential in Dansoman, and then they should be able to tell you how many apartments at what price they are going for.
Exactly, give you rates and all of that. Basically. Now you mentioned the issue of agents. We saw in the video as well the problem that people encounter with agents. Isn't it an offense for an agent to demand or to receive an amount exceeding 5% of the recoverable rent for a year?
The law makes it an offense. The Rent Act 1960 makes it an offense under section 25, that an agent in tenancy agreement is not supposed to receive more than 5% of the value of the rent
for a year,
of the value of the rent.
Okay, so any agent who demands or collects more than 5% has committed a crime or an offense,
right? Essentially.
So if you're looking for accommodation and you come across, what about the registration? He mentioned something about registration as well. That's a new one they've come up with.
Right. All those are, I mean, if you go according to the Act, all those are things that they cannot do. Because as an agent, all that he's entitled to under the Act is 5% or less of the recoverable rent.
And all those.
Basically, yes. And on conviction, that such a person can be incarcerated for up to 6 months.
Wow. Let's talk about the high rent charges in this country. Is there a body that regulates rents? Like how much should be charged? Is there like a guideline or anything? Because let's be honest, some of these landlords charge ridiculous
it would surprise you to know that there is. The rent and housing committees are basically charged to oversee that. And there's what the law terms as recoverable rent. There's a schedule.
What does that mean, recoverable rent?
Recoverable rent basically is what rent is chargeable given the state of the property in terms of size and all that. A schedule to the act actually fixes it to the size of the property. And so if you went to any of the rent and housing committees, where people call the rent control now, they will tell you what rent is recoverable in terms of what rent is chargeable
for a particular area,
apartment, depending on the size and all that.
Okay.
And so ideally, and like I keep on saying, if these committees were acting and working very well, then the issue of the landlord coming out to charge what he thinks he wants would not come in at all, because the landlord is registered with the rent committee, and the rent committee knows what is recoverable rent, and the tenant, the would-be tenant, is also going to the committee. That interplay basically will be there, and so the issue of what is recoverable rent essentially will be overseen by the committee, which in that case will be an independent arbiter between the two of them.
Everything will be streamlined.
Right.
Perfectly.